Ever have a bored, heavily tanned retiree try to micromanage the exact length of your St. Augustine grass? I was standing in my own driveway in Boca Raton, Florida, holding a half-empty mug of lukewarm coffee, sweating through my t-shirt at 9 in the morning. And there she was. Susan, HOA President, self-appointed guardian of the Mediterranean aesthetic, and absolute terror to anyone who didn't drive a leased Lexus. She was wearing a visor that cast a sharp shadow over her permanently scowling face, and she was glaring at my front lawn like I had just parked a burning garbage truck on it. "I'm telling you this for your own good, Mark," Susan said, her voice dripping with that fake, syrupy sweetness that actually means she wants to see you ruin your life. "The gnome has to go." I looked at her, then looked at the gnome. It was standard size, ceramic, painted with a slightly chipped blue hat and a white beard. It was holding a tiny plastic fishing rod over my birdbath. My late grandfather had given it to me, and frankly I thought it was hilarious. "Susan, it's a 12-inch piece of fired clay," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "It's not hurting anyone. It's barely even visible from the street." "It's not about visibility, Mark," she snapped, dropping the fake sweetness instantly. She stepped forward, pointing an acrylic fingernail at my chest. "It's about the standard, the community covenants. We maintain a strict Tuscan-inspired atmosphere here in Cypress Pines. Gnomes are tacky. They are aggressively low-class, and they are a direct violation of Article 4, Section 12, regarding unapproved lawn ornamentation." "Tuscan-inspired?" I laughed out loud, which was my first mistake. "Susan, we live behind a strip mall with a discount mattress store and a drive-through liquor joint. The only thing Tuscan about this neighborhood is the Olive Garden 2 blocks away." Her eyes went wide. She audibly gasped, actually clutching the collar of her pastel polo shirt. "I am writing you up. Right now. You had your warning last week." "That wasn't a warning, Susan. That was a Post-it note left on my windshield that just said trash in red Sharpie." "It served as official notice," she shrieked, scribbling furiously on her pink clipboard. The sound of her pen tearing into the carbon copy paper was agonizingly loud. She ripped the sheet off with a theatrical flourish and practically shoved it into my free hand. $500. Payable to the Cypress Pines HOA within 15 days, or we will place a lien on your property. Good day, Mark." She spun on the heels of her pristine white tennis shoes and marched away, her visor bobbing with every rigid step. I stood there for a solid minute, staring at the yellow piece of paper in my hand. $500. Over a gnome. A lien on my house. My actual, legally owned property that I paid a mortgage on every single month. I felt the heat rising in my chest, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the oppressive Florida sun. It was the principle of the thing. The sheer, unadulterated audacity. I didn't go back inside right away. I picked up the gnome, brushed a speck of dirt off his blue hat, and set him right on my front porch, directly facing Susan's house across the street. "Oh, we're playing this game now?" I thought. "All right, let's play." I went inside, slammed the heavy wooden door behind me, and tossed the ticket onto my kitchen island. I grabbed a cold beer out of the fridge. Yes, it was 9:15 a.m., but it was practically a medical necessity at this point, and pulled out my laptop. If Susan wanted to throw the rulebook at me, fine. I was going to read the damn rulebook. All 342 pages of the Cypress Pines covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I hit a roadblock around page 74. The legal jargon was so dense it felt like trying to chew through concrete. My eyes were glazing over. I needed backup. I pulled out my phone and hit speed dial for Dave. Dave was my buddy from college, a corporate lawyer who spent his days finding loopholes for massive tech companies, and his nights listening to me complain about my neighbors. "Talk to me," Dave answered, sounding incredibly distracted by the sound of furious typing in the background. I need you to tell me how to destroy an HOA president legally without going to jail, I said, pacing my kitchen. Dave stopped typing. I could hear him lean back in his expensive leather chair. Okay, I'm listening. What did Susan do now? She fined me $500 for a lawn gnome, said it violated the Tuscan aesthetic and threatened a lien on my house. $500, Dave. I want blood. Or at least, I want to make her life an absolute bureaucratic nightmare. A gnome? Dave snorted. Send me the CC&Rs, the full document. Let me run it through my firm's parsing software. Already emailed it to you. You're learning, Dave chuckled. Give me 10 minutes. Pour another drink. Do not go back outside and yell at her. I know you, Mark. Keep your mouth shut until we have leverage. I hung up and stared at the kitchen clock. Those 10 minutes felt like 10 years. I kept looking out the window, watching Susan patrol the sidewalk, looking for other victims. She cited the Hendersons for leaving their garbage cans out 3 minutes past the designated retrieval time. She took a photo of the Martinez's front door because the brass knocker wasn't shiny enough. She was a menace. A dictator in khakis. My phone buzzed. I practically snatched it off the counter. Tell me you found something. Oh, buddy. Dave's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. I found something better than a loophole. I found a loaded gun that they left right on the coffee table. Talk to me. Okay, go to page 214, Article 18, Section 3, the Transparency Clause. I frantically scrolled through the PDF on my laptop. Article 18, Section 3, okay, I got it. It says, to foster community awareness and ensure all residents are fully informed of their obligations, any display of official HOA governing documents is completely exempt from Architectural Review Board approval. So? What does that mean? Mark, think about it, Dave said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. Read the wording. Any display. It doesn't specify size. It doesn't specify format. It doesn't specify medium. And it specifically, explicitly exempts it from the Architectural Review Board. I stared at the screen. My brain was churning, connecting the dots. You're saying, I could print the rules out and put them on a sign in my yard? A sign? Dave scoffed. You're thinking too small. You wanted to destroy her, right? You wanted a nightmare. The clause says any display is exempt from approval. Your house is a blank canvas, Mark. How much money do you have in your petty revenge fund? I looked around my house. I looked at the pristine, Tuscan-approved beige stucco of my front exterior. I thought about Susan's smug, heavily powdered face. A slow, deeply unhinged smile spread across my face. Dave, I whispered. Are you telling me what I think you're telling me? I'm telling you, Dave laughed, that if you were to, hypothetically, turn your entire house into a billboard broadcasting the complete text of the HOA Rulebook, they couldn't do a damn thing about it. Legally. I hung up the phone. I didn't even say goodbye. I immediately opened a new tab on my browser and typed in a search. I needed a contractor. I didn't need a painter, and I didn't need a landscaper. I needed a commercial vehicle wrap specialist. This was going to be the most gloriously tacky thing Boca Raton had ever seen. Finding the right guy for the job was, honestly, a lot harder than I thought it would be. I mean, you try calling up a bunch of local contractors in South Florida and telling them you want to cover a 4-bedroom, Mediterranean-style stucco home in a massive, weatherproof vinyl decal containing 300 pages of legal text. I literally spent the first 2 hours getting hung up on. One guy told me he didn't do pranks. Another asked if I was off my medication. And a third, a high-end exterior decorator, gasped so loudly into the receiver I thought she was having a medical emergency. I guess people around here take their beige stucco very, very seriously. By noon, I had pivoted my strategy. I stopped looking up residential contractors and started searching for commercial vehicle wrap specialists. The kind of guys who take a fleet of rusted-out plumbing vans and turn them into rolling billboards. That's when I found Vinny's Mobile Graphics and Auto Customs operating out of a sketchy industrial park in Pompano Beach. I drove down there immediately. The shop smelled like a toxic, beautiful mix of industrial adhesive, exhaust fumes, and stale Marlboro Reds. The walls were covered in glossy photos of neon-wrapped Lamborghinis and box trucks advertising pest control services with giant, terrifyingly realistic palmetto bugs on them. Vinny was sitting behind a metal desk, eating a meatball sub. He was a mountain of a man, probably in his late 50s, wearing a faded tank top, heavily tattooed arms, and a scowl that made Susan's look amateurish. "Help you?" he grunted, not looking up from his sandwich. "I have a project," I said, leaning on the counter. "A big one? Honestly, it's a little unconventional, but I have a healthy budget." Vinny chewed slowly, finally raising his eyes. "We wrap cars, boats, and sometimes food trucks. I don't do windows, I don't do storefronts unless you're paying double, and I don't do political signs. What do you got?" "I have a house," I said. Vinny stopped chewing. He just stared at me for a long, uncomfortable second. "You want me to wrap an RV?" "No, like a stationary, fixed-to-the-ground, 2-story house, stucco exterior, about 3,000 square feet of surface area." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, letting out a rough, barking laugh. "Buddy, I think you're in the wrong shop. You want a painter? Go down to Home Depot." "I don't want it painted," I insisted, pulling my laptop out of my bag and opening it on his desk, right next to his meatballs. "I want it wrapped in this." I spun the laptop around so he could see the PDF of the Cypress Pines HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Vinny leaned in, squinting at the screen. "What is this? A contract?" "It's my HOA Rulebook. All 342 pages of it. I need you to print the entire document, every single word, clause, and subsection, onto massive sheets of weatherproof vinyl wrap. And then I need you and your crew to come to Boca Raton and plaster it over every square inch of my house's exterior. I want the font to be 72-point Arial, black text, stark white background. I want the section on unapproved lawn ornamentation to be positioned directly over my garage door, facing the street." Vinny stared at the screen, then looked up at me. He reached for a pack of cigarettes on his desk, tapped one out, and lit it, taking a long, slow drag. The smoke plumed up around his face. "You're out of your mind," Vinny said, his voice raspy. "I mean, technically, I'm fully compliant with Article 18, Section 3 of my governing documents," I replied, pulling up the exact page. "See right here? Any display of official HOA governing documents is completely exempt from Architectural Review Board approval. My HOA president just fined me $500 for a lawn gnome, so I am going to foster some community awareness, like a lot of it." Vinny read the screen. He read it again. The corners of his mouth started to twitch. Then, a massive, booming laugh erupted from his chest, shaking the desk. "Oh, man," Vinny wheezed, slamming a meaty hand down on the counter. "Oh, that is beautiful. I literally had to sell my boat last year because my HOA said it was an eyesore in my own driveway. You're weaponizing their own paperwork against them." "Exactly," I said, grinning. "Can you do it?" Vinny took another drag of his cigarette, his eyes suddenly sharp and calculating. "Stucco is tricky. It's textured. Standard cast vinyl won't stick right. It'll bubble when it gets hot, and down here, it gets hot. We'd have to use a high-tack architectural film, something like 3M Envision with a heavy-duty overlaminate. We'll have to heat roll it into the grooves of the stucco so it looks painted on." "I don't care what it takes, honestly," I said. "How much and how fast?" He grabbed a calculator and started punching numbers aggressively. "Material cost for that much square footage is going to be steep. Plus laying out 300 pages of text so it formats properly around your windows, doors, and gutters. That's a graphic design nightmare. And I gotta bring a crew of 4 guys, rent scaffolding, and we'll probably be out there for 2 full days sweating our bags off. He hit the equals button and turned the calculator around. The number was high. It was, frankly, more than I had spent on my last car. But when I thought about Susan's face, it felt like an absolute bargain. Done, I said. Vinny raised an eyebrow. Just like that? You don't want to haggle? You must really hate this woman. Vinny, I am paying for a masterpiece. When can we start? Give me 4 days to order the specialty vinyl and get my graphic designer to lay out the text files. We'll roll up on Tuesday morning. Early. Like, before the birds are awake early. Perfect, I said, reaching out to shake his hand. Let's make some art. The next 4 days were an agonizing exercise in restraint. Every time I walked out to get my mail, Susan was there, patrolling. She even stopped by my driveway on Saturday morning, holding that ridiculous pink clipboard, just to remind me that I only had 10 days left to pay the fine before she initiated the lien process. I just smiled, nodded, and told her I was reviewing the rules very carefully to ensure I was in full compliance. She looked smug. I literally had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing in her face. Tuesday morning arrived. I was awake at 4 a.m., pacing the living room, drinking coffee black. At exactly 5:30 a.m., a massive diesel-chugging box truck backed into my driveway, followed by a pickup truck hauling a flatbed trailer loaded with metal scaffolding. The noise was glorious. The backup beeper on the box truck echoed through the silent, meticulously manicured streets of cypress pines like a war horn. Vinny hopped out of the cab, holding a thermos and a rolled-up set of blueprints. 3 other guys piled out behind him, carrying heat guns, heavy rubber squeegees, and massive rolls of what looked like giant white wallpaper. "All right, boss," Vinny said, walking up to the porch. "We're locked and loaded. We mapped out the text. Chapter 1 starts on the left side of the garage, wraps around the front door, and we got the entire schedule of fines and penalties going right up the master bedroom wall on the 2nd floor. It's going to be highly legible." "Let's do it," I said, practically vibrating with excitement. They moved fast. Vinny wasn't kidding when he said these guys were pros. By 6:15 a.m., they had the scaffolding erected against the front of the house. The neighborhood was starting to wake up. I could see blinds twitching in the houses across the street. At 6:30 a.m., they unfurled the first massive panel of vinyl. It was stark white, and printed on it in bold, aggressive 72-point black Arial font was Declaration of Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions for Cypress Pines. Vinny's guys slapped the top edge against the roofline above my garage, peeled back the release liner, and started hitting it with industrial heat guns, rolling the adhesive down into the textured stucco with brutal efficiency. By 7:30 a.m., my entire garage and the wall surrounding the front door were covered. From the street, it looked like a giant, psychotic newspaper. It was the ugliest, most jarring, most beautifully tacky thing I had ever seen. The Mediterranean illusion of my house was completely shattered, replaced by a screaming wall of legal bureaucracy. I was sitting in a lawn chair in my driveway, sipping my coffee, when the front door of the house across the street flew open. Susan emerged. She was wearing a fluffy pink bathrobe, curlers in her hair, and a look of absolute, unadulterated horror on her face. She stopped dead in her tracks on her front walkway, staring at my house. Her jaw actually dropped. I mean, literally hung open. She stood there for a solid 30 seconds, frozen, before her brain seemed to reboot. She spun around, ran back inside, and slammed her door. 10 minutes later, she was back out. The bathrobe was gone, replaced by her official HOA President uniform. Khaki capris, a crisp white polo, and the visor. She was clutching her phone to her ear and practically sprinting across the street. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking as she marched up my driveway. She wasn't even looking at me. She was staring up at the 2nd story, where Vinny was currently heat-rolling a section detailing the strict guidelines regarding the color of acceptable mailbox posts. "Morning, Susan," I said pleasantly, not getting up from my lawn chair. "Just getting some exterior work done, fostering a little community awareness, you know." "Are you insane, Mark?" she screamed, finally turning her furious gaze on me. Her face was turning a dangerous shade of magenta. "This is vandalism. This is the most grotesque, blatant violation of the community standards I have ever seen. Stop them! Stop them right now!" Vinny paused up on the scaffolding, looking down at Susan with his heat gun still running. "We got a problem down there, buddy?" he yelled over the noise. "No problem, Vinny," I yelled back. "Just the welcoming committee. Keep rapping. I want Article 8 done before lunch." Susan was physically shaking. "I am calling the police. I am having these men arrested for destruction of property, and I am having you committed." "Go for it," I said, gesturing toward her phone. Honestly, I'd love to get their take on it. She furiously tapped on her screen, pressed the phone to her ear, and started pacing a tight circle at the end of my driveway, glaring daggers at me. "Yes, 911. I need officers at 442 Cypress Boulevard immediately. A resident is vandalizing his own home, destroying the neighborhood aesthetic, and he has hired thugs to help him. Yes, it's an emergency. He's destroying our property values in real time." She hung up and pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are finished, Mark. The board will seize this house. You'll be bankrupt." "I guess we'll see, Susan," I replied, taking another sip of coffee. We waited in silence, save for the hum of the heat guns, and the sound of Vinny's crew slapping more giant swaths of text onto my house. The right side of the exterior was now completely covered in the rules regarding pet weight limits and leash lengths. It was majestic. About 15 minutes later, a Boca Raton Police Department SUV rolled slowly down the street, its lights off, but the officers inside were clearly craning their necks to look at my house. They pulled up to the curb, parking right behind Vinny's box truck. 2 officers got out. One was a younger guy, maybe late 20s, looking highly confused. The other was an older, heavier-set sergeant with a gray mustache who looked like he was deeply regretting picking up this shift. Susan immediately charged them before they even closed their car doors. "Officers, thank God," she cried, waving her arms. "You have to stop them. Look at what he's doing to our community." The sergeant adjusted his belt and looked past Susan, his eyes scanning the massive wall of text that was now my house. He squinted, reading the side of the garage. Is that a contract on your house?" the younger officer asked, looking at me. "It's the HOA governing documents, officer," I said, finally standing up and walking over to them. "Good morning, by the way." "Arrest him," Susan demanded, inserting herself between me and the sergeant. "He's violating city nuisance codes. He's defacing a structure." The sergeant held up a hand to silence her. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." "Sir, what exactly is going on here? We got a call about property destruction." "No destruction here, officer," I said calmly, keeping my hands visible. "I own this home. This is my property. I hired a licensed commercial wrapping company to apply a vinyl decal to my exterior. It's completely non-destructive. If I wanted to take it off tomorrow, it peels right off without damaging the stucco." "It's illegal!" Susan shrieked. "It violates Article 4 of the CC&Rs regarding exterior modifications. He didn't get Architectural Review Board approval. It's an illegal modification, and he's doing it just to harass me." The sergeant sighed, a deep, tired sound that suggested he had dealt with Susan, or people exactly like Susan, many times before. "Ma'am, HOA rules are a civil matter. If he didn't get your board's approval, you can fine him or take him to court. The police don't enforce your neighborhood paint colors." "It's a public nuisance," Susan countered, practically stomping her foot. "Look at it. It's an eyesore. It's disturbing the peace." The younger officer was trying very hard to hide a smile. He was reading the text wrapped around my front window. Section 12, subsection B. No artificial vegetation shall be permitted on the exterior of any lot, he muttered, sounding incredibly amused. Actually, officer, I chimed in, pulling a folded, printed copy of the CC&Rs from my back pocket. I had highlighted the golden ticket. I am not violating any HOA rules. In fact, I am strictly adhering to them. I handed the paper to the sergeant. Susan tried to snatch it, but the sergeant smoothly pulled it out of her reach. Page 214, Article 18, Section 3, I directed him. The transparency clause. The sergeant put on a pair of reading glasses and looked at the highlighted section. He read it silently, his mustache twitching slightly. Read it out loud, Susan demanded. There is no clause that permits this abomination. The sergeant cleared his throat. To foster community awareness and ensure all residents are fully informed of their obligations, any display of official HOA governing documents is completely exempt from Architectural Review Board approval. He took his glasses off and looked at me. Then he looked at the house. Then he looked at Susan. Well, ma'am, the sergeant said, a distinct hint of amusement in his gruff voice. Looks to me like he's displaying your official governing documents. And according to your own rulebook, he doesn't need your approval to do it. Susan's face went completely pale. The aggressive magenta drained away, leaving her looking sickly and shell-shocked. No, that clause was meant for the bulletin board at the clubhouse, for flyers, not this. The clause says any display, Susan, I pointed out. It doesn't specify flyers. My lawyer reviewed it. My house is now a display, a very, very transparent display. He's right, ma'am, the younger officer added, completely failing to hide his grin now. It says any display, unless you have a city ordinance he's violating, which, for a temporary vinyl wrap on private property, he isn't. There's absolutely nothing we can do here. Like my sergeant said, this is a civil issue. You two need to work it out with your board. You can't be serious, Susan stammered, backing away slowly. You're just going to let him do this? Our property values. Have a good day, ma'am, the sergeant said firmly, turning his back on her. He walked over to me and handed back the highlighted paper. Honestly, buddy, this is the craziest thing I've seen in 20 years on the force. But you crossed your T's and dotted your I's. Try to keep the noise down with the scaffolding, all right? Will do, officer. Appreciate you coming out. The cops got back in their SUV. As they drove away, I saw the younger officer roll down his window and snap a photo of my house with his cell phone before turning the corner. Susan was standing in the middle of the street, looking like her entire worldview had just collapsed. She looked at the house, where Vinny was now happily heat-rolling the section on trash can storage over my living room window. And then she looked at me. You haven't won, Mark, she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. I am calling an emergency executive session of the board. Tonight. We will draft an emergency injunction. We will have you in court by tomorrow morning. I look forward to it, Susan, I smiled. Just make sure you bring the rulebook. Oh, wait, you don't have to. You can just read it off my garage. She let out a sound that was half scream, half sob, and practically ran back to her house, slamming the door so hard I could hear it over the heat guns. I looked up at Vinny, who had stopped working to watch the entire exchange. Hey, boss, Vinny yelled down, a massive grin splitting his face. That lady seems a little stressed. You want me to bold the section on dispute resolution above the porch so she can read it easier next time? Vinny, I yelled back. I literally want you to make it as bold as humanly possible. The rest of the day was a surreal blur. By noon, the text messages started flooding in from neighbors. Not angry ones, surprisingly. Most of them were from people who had also been terrorized by Susan over the years. Dave the lawyer called me on his lunch break, howling with laughter after I sent him a picture of the progress. Tell me the cops showed up, Dave wheezed. Oh, they showed up, I said. watching Vinny's crew carefully trim around my exterior light fixtures. Susan tried to have me arrested for vandalism. The cops read your loophole and basically told her to kick rocks. She's calling an emergency board meeting tonight. Of course she is, Dave said, and she's going to try to push through an emergency amendment to close the loophole or hit you with a nuisance violation under the city code, not the HOA code. But here's the thing, Mark. She can't. Why not? Because Florida Statute 720, which governs HOAs, requires a minimum of 14 days' notice to all members for any meeting where an amendment to the CC&Rs is being voted on. An emergency executive session can only be used for actual emergencies, like a pipe burst in the clubhouse or an imminent lawsuit against the association. A guy putting an ugly rap on his house doesn't qualify as a statutory emergency. If they try to pass a rule tonight to stop you, it is procedurally invalid. Void ab initio. It means absolutely nothing. I felt a rush of pure, vindictive joy. So she's trapped. She is completely boxed in by the bureaucracy she worships, Dave confirmed. Go to that meeting tonight, Mark. Let her rant, let her scream, let her propose her emergency injunction, and then you drop Statute 720 on her head. I'll email you the exact case law. Print it out. Bring it with you. Dave, I love you, man. I know. My hourly rate for this advice is going to be a steak dinner next time you're in town. Send me more pictures when it's done. By 5 p.m., Vinny and his crew were packing up their trucks. The job was finished, and it was breathtaking in its audacity. My home, once a tasteful, understated suburban dwelling, now looked like a giant, hostile, legal document that had sprouted out of the ground. The text covered every inch of the stucco. The paragraphs wrapped flawlessly around corners, flowed over window frames, and cascaded down the pillars of the front porch. The contrast of the stark, black Arial font against the glaring white background was visually aggressive. It was impossible to look at without getting a headache. Vinny walked up to me, wiping his brow with a greasy towel. I gotta tell you, Mark, Vinny said, looking back at the house with genuine pride in his eyes. I've wrapped a lot of weird stuff in my life. I once wrapped a PT Cruiser to look like a giant block of Swiss cheese for a deli owner. But this is my magnum opus. This belongs in a museum of spite. You guys did incredible work, Vinny. Seriously, I'll transfer the rest of the funds right now. Appreciate it. Hey, if she gives you any more trouble, let me know. I got a buddy who makes commercial air horns. We could mount a few on your roof, wire 'em to a motion sensor, set 'em to go off every time she steps on her lawn. I think the house is loud enough for now, I laughed. As Vinny's trucks rumbled out of the neighborhood, the real show began. The evening commute was starting, and people returning home to Cypress Pines were driving past my house. Every single car slowed down. Some stopped completely. People were rolling down their windows, taking pictures, pointing, and laughing. A small crowd of teenagers on bicycles had gathered on the sidewalk across the street, reading the fines section out loud and mocking the rules. I sat on my porch, right next to the gnome that started it all, and just watched the chaos unfold. Susan's house was entirely dark. The blinds were drawn tight. I knew she was in there, probably stress-eating antacids and preparing for the board meeting. At 6:30 p.m., my phone dinged. It was an email notification from the Cypress Pines HOA Management Company. Urgent. Emergency Zur, Executive Board Meeting, 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. All residents encouraged to attend. Topic: Immediate action. Regarding Lot 42, exterior modification. Lot 42 was my house. I went inside, changed out of my sweaty clothes, and put on a crisp button-down shirt. If I was going to systematically dismantle a tyrant in front of the entire neighborhood, I wanted to look professional doing it. I grabbed the printout of Florida Statute 720 that Dave had sent me, tucked it into a manila folder, and started walking toward the clubhouse. The parking lot at the clubhouse was packed. Word had clearly spread. Usually, HOA meetings in this neighborhood consisted of Susan, the two terrified retirees she had bullied into joining the board, and maybe one guy complaining about the pool temperature. Tonight, it looked like a town hall meeting in an election year. I pushed through the double glass doors and walked into the main meeting room. The chatter instantly died down. Every head in the room turned to look at me. Some people glared, but honestly, a lot of people were smirking. The guy who lived 2 doors down from me, who Susan had once fined for having unauthorized seasonal doormats, gave me a subtle thumbs up. Susan was sitting at the front table, flanked by the vice president, an exhausted-looking guy named Gary, and the secretary, a nervous woman named Helen. Susan looked like she was about to explode. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she was gripping her gavel so hard her knuckles were white. "Sit down, Mark," Susan hissed into the microphone, feedback whining through the cheap speakers. "I'll stand, Susan, thanks," I said, leaning against the back wall, crossing my arms. Susan banged the gavel unnecessarily hard. "I call this emergency executive session of the Cypress Pines Homeowners Association to order. We are here to address an unprecedented, malicious, and frankly psychotic act of vandalism committed by the owner of Lot 42. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. As of this morning, Lot 42 has been covered in an illegal, unapproved vinyl covering that violates the very core of our community's aesthetic standards, Susan continued, her voice rising in pitch. It is a deliberate mockery of this board and a public nuisance that threatens the property values of every single homeowner in this room. "It's the Rulebook, Susan," someone yelled from the back of the room. "He just printed out your rules." "Order," Susan barked, banging the gavel again. "It does not matter what is printed on it. It is an unapproved exterior modification. The board has convened tonight to pass an emergency injunction. We are moving to immediately amend Article 18, Section 3 of the CCNRs to explicitly prohibit the display of governing documents on exterior structures, and we are assessing a daily fine of $1,000 against Lot 42 until the covering is removed. Gary, do I have a second on the motion?" Gary looked terrified. He looked at me, then at Susan. I second, I guess. "All in favor?" Susan asked, raising her own hand immediately. Gary and Helen hesitantly raised theirs. "Motion passes. The rules are officially amended. Mark, you are now in violation, and your fines begin at midnight. If you do not remove that abomination by Friday, we will file for an emergency court order to have it removed by a third party at your expense." She looked at me with a triumphant, venomous smile. She thought she had won. She thought she had outmaneuvered me with her bureaucratic gavel. I slowly opened my manila folder. The room was dead silent. "Well, Susan, that's a very impressive display of authority," I said, projecting my voice so everyone could hear. "But unfortunately, everything you just did for the last 5 minutes is completely illegal and legally void." Susan's smile vanished. "Excuse me? You do not have the floor." "I don't need the floor, I have the law," I said, walking slowly down the center aisle toward the board table. "You just attempted to pass an amendment to the CCNRs in an emergency executive session. But according to Florida Statute 720.306, any meeting at which a proposed amendment to the governing documents is to be considered requires a minimum of 14 days written notice to all members." I slapped the printout of the statute down on the table, right in front of her. "You gave us 30 minutes notice via email," I continued, looking her dead in the eye. "Furthermore, statutory emergency powers can only be invoked in response to damage caused by an event for which a state of emergency is declared, like a hurricane. Me wrapping my house in your own rules because you tried to extort me over a lawn gnome is not a state of emergency, Susan. It's just you throwing a tantrum." The crowd erupted. People were laughing, clapping, and talking over each other. "Silence!" Susan screamed, her voice cracking. She looked down at the paper, her eyes darting across the legal text. She knew I was right. I could see the panic setting in. This is a technicality. You are still creating a nuisance." "A nuisance defined by who?" I shot back. "The police already told you it's not a city violation. And your own HOA rules, The ones currently plastered in 72-point font on my garage explicitly protect my right to display them. You can't amend the rule tonight, which means the rule still stands. I am fully compliant. I leaned in closer, resting my hands on the table. Here is what is going to happen, Susan, I said quietly, so only the board could hear. You are going to drop the $500 fine for the gnome. You are going to publicly drop this ridiculous emergency injunction, and you are going to leave me alone. If you try to push this, if you try to take me to court or touch my house, I will hire my lawyer. I will sue the HOA for harassment, selective enforcement, and procedural violations, and when I win, which I will, every single homeowner in this room will be paying my legal fees out of their special assessments. Do you want to explain to them why their HOA dues are doubling because you couldn't handle a ceramic elf? Susan stared at me, her chest heaving. She looked at Gary and Helen, looking for support. They both aggressively shook their heads, refusing to make eye contact with her. The mutiny was complete. Susan slumped back in her chair. The fight completely left her body. She looked old, tired, and utterly defeated. Fine, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chatter of the room. Excuse me? I didn't catch that, I said. She leaned into the microphone. The board withdraws the motion. The fine against Lot 42 is dismissed. Meeting adjourned. She didn't bang the gavel this time. She just stood up, grabbed her pink clipboard, and walked out the side door of the clubhouse without looking back. The room cheered. Several people actually came up and shook my hand. It turns out, when you successfully stand up to a neighborhood tyrant, you instantly become a local folk hero. I walked home that night under the glow of the streetlights. As I approached my house, the glaring white vinyl and black text stood out like a beacon in the night. It was hideous. It was truly an abomination of suburban architecture. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I kept the wrap on for a full month. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to ensure the lesson truly sank in. My house became a local tourist attraction. People from other neighborhoods would drive by on weekends just to take selfies in front of the section detailing the pool hours. A local news station even did a 3-minute fluff piece on it, which I guarantee Susan watched through her fingers while hiding in her living room. Eventually, the board, which Susan quietly resigned from 2 weeks later, properly noticed a meeting, followed the 14-day rule, and successfully amended the transparency clause to limit displays to standard bulletin board sizes. But because my wrap was installed before the amendment passed, I was legally grandfathered in. I could have kept it up forever. I finally called Vinny to come take it down right before the rainy season started. It peeled off cleanly, revealing the untouched, boring beige stucco underneath. The neighborhood returned to normal. The gnomes stayed. And nobody in Cypress Pines ever got a fine for the wrong shade of mulch ever again. So yeah, if your HOA ever tries to bully you over something trivial, don't just get mad. Read the fine print. Find the loophole. And if you have to, turn your entire house into a billboard of malicious compliance. Anyway, that's all for this one. Keep reading those contracts, and I'll catch you in the next one.